Hey guys, welcome back to the newest episode of Dream Theater's Harmonic Analysis. Today we're taking a look at the Shadow Man incident off of Parasomnia. If anybody would like to join the channel memberships, there's a link in the description below. Bonus content, never before seen videos that will never be released to the public, as well as stuff that goes public a month from now. As for the support, let's get on to the song. All right, couple things off the top here. Number one, we are in standard tuning. However, Petrucci uses a 7-string on this song, and I do not have a 7-string. I will be looking at this as if it's a 6-string. And if some of the notes, the note names that I use don't make sense to you, that's why. I want to look at this more in terms of intervals rather than actual letter names. The intervals are what matter in the end anyway. So we are essentially starting off on what appears to be like a very dynamic version of the G major scale. This first little section here, that little section uses G's, G roots, G octaves. It has a major 7 in the F sharp. It has a D as the 5. It has an E flat as a minor 6. I might even refer to that as a sharp 5 at some point. And you also have a D flat, which is the tritone, as well as a C, which is the 4th. There are other sections that you heard that come right after that section that will actually include the minor 3rd in addition, and also, again, more flat 5 and flat 6 or sharp 5, however you'd like to look at it. And then there is a really cool tritone into perfect 5th trill that takes place right here. And then it goes right back into that G. So you get the tritone with the 5th being the perfect kind of resolution back to the 1. And then it continues. The next little section contains a really interesting passage. It's very quick, so let's listen to it. Let's give you one more round of that because that's dizzying. Here we go. All right, so that essentially does a very interesting pattern. It almost appears to be like the outline of a scale, but upon taking a look at the notes themselves, we're doing a bunch of minor 3rd intervals. We're going from F sharp to A, which is a minor 3rd. Then we're going to go from C to E flat, which is another minor 3rd. Then we're going from G sharp to B, which is another minor 3rd. And then we're going to do a B down to F, which is a tritone. And then from that tritone, F, we drop down a half step to E, and then E becomes kind of like the implied 5 chord, like a secondary dominant, because the next chord outlined will be like an A chord. And again, these notes, they're just there for reference. What's important here is not that I'm saying we're going from an E to an A as like a 5 to 1. It's the 5 to 1. That's the important part. So again, I don't work with 7 strings. I'm looking at this intervallically for what it's worth. As you guys probably know, you can play any song in any key by transposing it, and that's essentially what we're doing here. So the next section is this. And as you can hear, it sounds very much like the first part. It's the same theme, but it's been moved up. And specifically reusing, we're calling it a riff variation in this case. So it's reusing the same intervals, but moving them to a different location to give it a fresh feel. All right, the next section is this. This has shades of the Overture 1928, and we're riding in E note for all those. At the end of all those E's in the marching section, there's a measure of 7/8 coming up. And now we're into the rockin' section. All right, so let's analyze what's going on here. Again, in no particular naming order here. Don't worry about the letters, just worry about the intervals. We're essentially doing what I would consider to be like an A down to a G up to a B flat. So we're dealing with like essentially a... If we assume G is the 1, you got the A as the major second, and then the B flat is the minor third, and that kind of continues with the triplet rhythm. And then you have this section that you heard, and that section essentially does like an F to an F, back to F. And then it does like an F tritone, which then leads to like an F major. So we have like a play on intervals here. We have the F here, F again, and then you have the tritone followed by the major interval right here. So Petrucci loves intervals, and he does a lot of what I like to call power chord variations, 2-note intervallic power chords, and that happened to be tritone to major third. That was a really cool section. Now we're going to move up by a whole step and basically just transpose that very same thing we just did, but just move it up a whole step, and you get this again with the triplet rhythm. Same thing, tritone to major third. I'm gonna move it down by like a major third for this section. More of the same. We've modulated again to a different place, continuing with the theme. So it's kind of like a chord progression, but in riff form, right? Usually you'll have a chord progression, it'll be like a 1, 6, 4, 5, and you can change keys with that chord progression to give it a fresh feel, but keep with the same theme. The kind of the same thing here, where the riff is the same, the purpose behind it, the intervals used, and the rhythms used are the same. They just move the location to give it that sense of movement. And now we're going to be back to this. That's kind of like combining that marching rhythm that we heard earlier with a little bit of the intro rhythm. Again, just more transposing, keeping with the same everything, just moving it to keep it fresh. The next section brings us into the solo, which I'm not going to look at. Let's take a look at the B section. All right, so coming in on the B section, we're met with this. Such great movements. I love this part. Ready? All right. We're going to cut it at the end of that little chord section. So essentially what's going on here, this part, if you were to break down the notes used, you're essentially left with a G minor 6, and that repeats 6 times. Then we're met with this. That's one measure. That's essentially like a D flat major chord, but with a flat 5. So it's D flat, flat 5. Then we're met with this. That breaks down to be like an F minor over C. And then this, back to the G. This one, that breaks down to be like a D minor add 9. And then the really cool 4-chord section, we could call it a 5-chord section. I'm going to play it again, just for context. Here we go. God, that might be the best 2 measures of the entire song. I absolutely love that. So what's going on there? Very interesting voicings for very interesting chords. The first chord is an A flat minor. That's this one. Then we're brought to an A minor. That's this one. Then we're met with an F minor. That's this one. And then you have a 3-note arpeggiation of a D diminished chord, which is this. And then it ends on an A minor chord, which is that. So, really interesting section. A lot of movement, a lot of color. I especially love that last section with the chords. So let's continue on here.